I'm speaking about effective verbal persuasion. There are three domains: prayer, business, and teaching. So let me dive in a little bit, and I'll tell you about the title. Let's see. Okay, here's a typical problem. You're somebody. Maybe you're a rabbi, priest, imam. Maybe you're a business manager. Maybe you're a teacher. And you are counseling maybe a student, maybe someone who works underneath you, maybe a congregant. They have some type of problem, and maybe you just want them to improve. You want to improve the student's knowledge, his methods. You want to improve the subordinate's productivity. You want the congregant to have his prayers answered, whatever you want. So the issue is, what do you say? What works best? Now, the way this title came about is I was doing some research for ways to help students improve. In other words, you have a student, they're not doing so well, or they're doing what they should be doing, you want them to improve more. What do you say to them? Now, I've spoken to some people who say we are positive. That unfortunately is not totally true. And I started reading the literature. There isn't that much literature on it. There is a lot of literature on it. I found a lot in the sports literature on it, because if you're in a sports team, what does the coach say to get people out there and winning? There's a literature on it. I noticed the things being said resemble a lot of things I've seen about prayer. So the title reflects the fact that there are multiple disciplines where talk, whether you're talking to yourself, whether you're talking to a subordinate, whether you're talking in a team like a coach enabling a sports team, there are many disciplines where you have this issue: what should I say? What's the best way to say it that will yield results? And there are all types of interesting experiments. Now, when I started writing this, I realized a lot of people will say, well, he's going to say the obvious, that you should be positive. That's very nice. So I thought I'd give some examples, and I'd like some participation. The flavor of the cases, the variety of disciplines, and I want to motivate you to listen to the presentation. The obvious answer is not necessarily correct. So let's go through a few cases. I think I picked 3 or 4. Some of them are speculative. It's not like you can look everything up in a book. Let's deal with the first one. A person's in a hospital for whatever reasons, they're being discharged. Now, you can divide patients into 2 groups. Those that say, I really was treated nicely here, again, positive talk, or those that say, you know, I really think I'm going to recover, or maybe there are people who say both. So by a show of hands, who thinks Group A will do better? Who thinks Group B will be better? Who thinks Group A will do better? Who thinks Group B will do better? Okay, that's right, so you know the answer. Okay. Now, this one, maybe because I told you it's not the obvious. You are dealing with homework. Okay, this is something all teachers do. So this is a study that was actually done, I think by Kutanis, and there are 3 ways to do it. So you can give the students letter grades or numerical grades. This person gets a 90, this person gets a 60, this person gets a B, someone gets a D, and you can just hand them back the paper with the letter grade without saying anything. Another thing you can do is not grade the homework. Say you did this work. If it's a composition, maybe you could use more connective words. Maybe you could have a theme to the paragraph. Maybe you could develop your paragraph. If it's a math problem, maybe with all the running arounds, you could do things in an orderly manner. Maybe you could state the final answer. Maybe you should state your technique or assumptions. There are lots of things you could say. Then, of course, there are the people who do both. They'll give you all these comments and letter grades. So again, A, B, or C, which one improves student grades best? How many think A? How many think B? Okay, everyone's against grades, good. How many think C? Okay, so C seems to win. Actually, the study says A works best. And the study says there's no difference between B and C. If you're going to give a letter grade, you're going to ruin everything. Yes?
How about if you say this is a draft, and if you don't respond to my comments, then this is the grade you're going to get?
I'm going to go into the reasons why this is so later, and we'll see an answer to that. Okay? I said I'm going to go into reasons. That was not part of the study, so I can simply say I don't know. But
so that's what I was thinking.
Okay, yeah. No, I don't mind questions, but as I said, I'll anticipate them later. This study was used. There was a study in Britain. I forget the name of the book, by a person named Black and a few other people. They spent 2 years in England. They trained teachers not to give grades, at least not on homework, even though they were part of the system that does give grades. They trained teachers to do that. They actually published a book on it, which there have been several editions and printings. But as I said, they are based on studies where this does work. From what I know, that draft method does not work. Yes, okay. Okay, this is from the sports literature. You have people practicing lifting weights. So I'll just show you, I can lift paper. Okay, you want to give feedback to help them lift better weights. So you have two options: to always go to the student and say, you just lifted an 80-pound weight, congratulations, maybe we'll work on a 90-pound weight. Or you can lie to the students and say, let's say they lift an 80-pound weight. You said, you know, you did that well, but it was only a 50-pound weight. I'd really like you to try harder. Maybe we'll give you a better one. Now, which of these methods will result in people lifting heavier weights? How many think A? How many think B? B works better, provided they believe you. So there's a little... provided they believe you. But the point is, this is a technique. It's called lowering the standard. And if you do it properly, if a good coach does it, you can actually get people to do it better. I thought I'd also take something speculative. So I got this from a symbolic interpretation of the sacrifices in the Bible. We'll go into later. I couldn't find any study on it, so I can't tell you this is correct or wrong. I can just raise the issue. And you have a person who makes a serious error. In this case, it came from the sacrifice literature. A person made a moral sin by accident, which might have been very serious, whatever a serious moral sin is to you. But it could be a person who makes an error and costs several $1,000s in an accounting firm. It could be a student who makes an error. Question is, what is better? To say, hey, look, you're a great guy, you're a great businessman, I'd like you to remember that, not do this again. Or you're a great moral person, you made a mistake, you know, we'll overlook it. That's one approach. Another approach is to say, look, I know you put a lot of effort and progress in, keep up the good work. How many people think A will work? How many people think B will work? Okay, I'll show you what this particular commentator said, and as I said, I don't know the scientific answer. I put down things here. So, future optimism, they say that optimism is better to pass gratitude. So that was the first one with the hospital. Optimism is better than gratitude. Comments are best. Comments plus grade, no. I'm going to have a whole section to answer your question. The reason is it's because of attribution theory, not because you're giving them another chance. So the point is, anytime you grade someone, you're basically, well, you're not attributing it to anything they control, and they're not motivated to work well. That's the underlying theory. Bogus reporting does work, but you can't do it too often because they catch on. But if you do it a little bit at the beginning, it really does help. Okay, this comes from the sacrifice literature, and and it comes from the blood throwing. I don't want to get into biblical symbolism. There's a difference between the sin offering of an ordinary person and the sin offering of a poor person in rural areas and depressed states. So the sin offering of an ordinary person, you put the blood on top. The sin offering of a poor person, a depressed person, the person doesn't think that much of themselves, you put in the middle. So the comment I had here, and I haven't been able to verify it one way or another, is that if you're an ordinary person, you make a mistake, the best approach is to remind the person where they've been. If you're a per person, you don't want to remind them where they've been because they don't think very highly of themselves. It's to remind them of their effort. But I'm just showing these are issues. They're common to several disciplines, and they transfer. Okay. I thought I'd mention prayer here because, as I said, when I saw these literatures, I immediately recognized that these are themes that come up in prayer all the time. So I'll just mention several things here. Let me mention the last two bullets first. I just mentioned the idea of lying, of believing that something is going to happen as a motivating factor. And many psalms end on thanks for answers to requests. And you can see this contrast in the psalm, and it's a known factor of them. So, for example, I took it because it's one of the first 4 psalms. First psalm is a wisdom psalm. It just speaks glowingly about life and things like that. Answer me when I pray, and it goes on, please answer me. And the end is this affirmation you have, notice the past tense, you have given me happiness, I can now sleep at night. These types of affirmations create a sense of belief and confidence that at least in the prayer world, are supposed to work. The first one I just thought I'd mention, there's actually a formula for prayer in the Jewish prayer books. I don't know about other prayer books, but an official prayer should have God as benefactor, so you're praying to someone who can deliver. The request should come in the middle, and you could have thanksgiving both in the past and future at the end. Again, there's this notion of optimism about the future, which we saw in the hospital study, and we saw also about the belief as if God had already answered you. Very often in the Psalms, the person will not say, I am confident you will answer me. You have answered me. They'll use the past tense. It's a known literary device, and it corresponds to, in the sports literature, they don't talk about prayer, but they talk about talking to oneself. And just as an example, a person loses a game. You lose a game, you're a pro, it depresses you, and we know from studies your self-confidence will go down. The point is, there's a lot of self-talk. If you say, I can't believe I did that, or you start cursing or anything else, that's not going to help you improve. There are things about self-talk. There are whole things about self-talk, whole things about imagery, and they relate very often to what we see in the Psalms. Okay. I'll just mention some more things. Very often you see in the Christian and Jewish literature, I haven't looked at the Islamic literature, there's a whole literature on people repenting, saying, I'm a sinner, I'm worthless, please forgive me. The church has the concept of vicarious atonement, but you see it in Jewish medieval literature also, I am not worthy. That is not, it may be morally proper. I don't think it's morally proper, but it's not going to help you change. I just took one example. There was a rebellion in the Bible. People rebelled against Moses, and there was an earthquake and fire, the usual things you see in the Bible, a very nice scene. And it's interesting what happens afterwards. You don't have a prophet like Moses saying, you do this again, and God has more for you. You don't threaten people. You don't say you're sinners. It says, in this case, people thought they could be the high priest, so they took plants or sticks and everything, and they tried to offer incense, and they were punished. He says, take these sticks and make them into flower ornaments to the altar, and so you created symbols to avoid errors in the future. And it's a different type of ethos in avoiding things. So I just thought I'd mention that. Okay. I still want to say some more things here. This is another example from the Psalms. The 6th Psalm is particularly a pathetic psalm if you look at it. So if you look through the psalm, I don't want to quote the whole psalm. I wet my bed with tears at night. I am destroyed. I am frightened. How long will you not answer me? My eyes have withered. The psalm goes on like this for 8 verses. So some psalms are not that depressive. In this psalm, it's very depressive. And all of a sudden in verse 9, he says, stay away, sinners, because God has heard my cry, and the past tense has been used. God took my prayer and answered it. Again, you see this contrast here. It's very important when you feel helpless, at least from the point of prayer, that's the way the Psalms are created, to engage in lying to yourself. God's answered me, and that creates the motivation to continue and do other things. So we see some of these themes here, and as I said, this is all the introduction. I'm going to go into some theory. We don't have all the theory, but I wanted to whet your appetite to show that these are issues common to multiple disciplines which you wouldn't connect. It's common to prayer, it's common to business, it's common to students. Again, I'll mention that study by Black, teaching for assessment instead of teaching for testing. That's the name of the book. It was a 2-year. It started with some papers in the late 90s, and then there was some wonderful experiments. They took aside a few districts in Britain, and they trained the teachers on how not to grade, how to give comments, how to encourage all the things we hear at conferences like this. How do you encourage questions that stimulate people to talk? How do you get people to cooperate in class when they're afraid to death to answer? And it's a 2-year study. You can get the book. The book's widely read. And they accomplished what they wanted because they still had to answer to the authorities. They were still under the British system. And you know what authorities want. What are the grades at the end of 2 years? I don't care if they're happy. I want to know if they know their stuff. They were both happy and they knew their stuff. So this type of thing does go on. It can be done. It requires training. That's all. And it requires, as several other people have already said, it requires a change of habit. And people are reluctant. I believe you pointed that out earlier. Okay. I already mentioned to you about the sacrifice symbolism. Okay, let me get to some theory. I'm not going to go over because at the last few slides, I just took a lot of papers, and I said I have a lot of papers, so the last 15 slides I might skip, but they are papers that support a lot of things that are going on. I wanted to get some theories so I can answer your question. The theories have to do with self-efficacy, attribution theory, imaging, and self-talk. I wanted to contrast this with the opposite of positive talk, negative talk, but I may not have time. I have one slide on it. Okay. Self-efficacy is basically the confidence that with my present abilities I can do something. Self-efficacy was introduced by Bandura, who founded social cognitive theory. Prior to Bandura, people were dominated by psychoanalysis. You do things because of unconscious urges. Well, the reason I did poorly on a test is because of a repressed memory that my mother yelled at me when I tried to do something well when I was a child. I have no control of what my mother did to me when I was 2 years old, and maybe psychoanalysis will bring that memory up and I'll get cured, but that's the way things were done. In social cognitive theory, we look at humans as agents. It's agentic. That's the word they use. People are their own agents. People succeed or fail because of their actions and because of their self-belief. Self-efficacy, one's confidence in one's abilities to do things, not one's optimism that one can do things, is the most important determinant of success. So how does one get self-efficacy? There are 6 drivers. Bandura gave 4. A person named Maddox broke off 2 of them. Past performance is the most strong predictor. If you've been doing anything, weightlifting, dart throwing, whatever we're going to talk about today, in the past, you'll probably have confidence you can do in the future. Vicarious influence, which is basically role models. And there's a whole literature on which type of role models help. So in the sports literature, the good athletes have had good role models, and they have certain characteristics. I want to get into verbal persuasion today. Verbal persuasion can come from coaches. It can come from teachers and other things. But it's more than just positive talk. There are certain types of positive talk. I want to get into it. I'm not going to get into these 2. Imaginal experiences, Maddox said, this was included in some of the other stuff. Can we, the way you imagine yourself going on in the future, it's like prayer, except God isn't mentioned, but you think of yourself, what you're going to do. These things influence how you'll perform, and this has been documented in many studies. So in verbal persuasion, the persuader should be someone prestigious, credible. He should be an expert and someone you trust. Well, like with the case with the bogus lies. Self-talk can have lots of components. It can be, or imaging. I can concentrate on individual skills. I can concentrate on effort. I can concentrate on removing negative thoughts. And there's literature on all of these things. It's the way I talk to myself about my future performance, whether it's in a sports game or a student performance, or as I say, in life, like we have with prayer. And how do I approach the task? Do I think of parts of it, the individual skills? Do I think of the whole, the holistic item? Do I think of how much effort I'm going to put in and things like that? Let me go on. This is imaginal experiences. And there's, in fact, there's a sports inventory of what people imagine. What do good sports athletes are imagining when they play a game? This has been studied. It's been studied which ones work, which ones don't. So I'll try and get into things. I put down at the bottom, your confidence in your imagery influences whether your imagery will help. But you can imagine yourself winning. Okay, I'm going into a game. I imagine myself winning. I talk to myself. My coach talks to me. I'm going to win this game. That's one type of imagery. You can imagine the throws, if you're playing basketball, or the weightlifting, or the boxing match, whatever. You can imagine a rehearsal of what you're going to do. That's another type of imaging. You can imagine your attitude. You can imagine yourself as confident, even if you're not confident. That helps improve confidence. You can imagine the effort you'll put in, and you can imagine yourself happy after you win. These are 5 dimensions of imaging, but they influence, and to the best of my knowledge, this is not really used in schools. It's used in sports because people talk to themselves after a game and everything else, but this would obviously influence what's done in schools, but it's not. The other thing I want to get to, and that answers your question about attribution theory. I found attribution theory in 5 or 6 places. Attribution theory is the theory of how I attribute success and failure. I just succeeded at something, I just failed. Why did I succeed? Why did I fail? There are 3 variables, and the use of these 3 variables, there are very specific patterns in what works and what doesn't work. Is it stable? Something that continues or unstable? If I got a good grade because of my name, I have a doctorate, that's something stable. If I succeeded because of my efforts, that's something unstable. If I stop my efforts, the thing will stop. Did I succeed because of something I do, or did I succeed because of something external? Someone invited me to this conference, that's why my talk is so good. Is it controllable or uncontrollable? And the basic theory is things like effort. When you attribute things to things like effort, usually not always they work. They have to be internal and unstable, which makes them controllable. So I'll just say it one more. They have to be things you can do. They have to be things that will not persist unless you do them, and then it's controllable. People who attribute their successes and failures to internal unstable causes tend to succeed. People who attribute their successes, oh, I lost that game, it was bad luck. Well, that's not going to help you improve in the future. And as I said, it's getting late, but there are lots of papers on this, and I just went into them. So I put down here, even though I didn't know you'd ask your question about saying the draft. The draft does not help. What helps, what they think helps, is the attribution theory. So it's not just making comments. The comments have to say, this is what you did well in this composition. This is what you didn't do well, but here is a procedure to do that well.
Well, I meant actually in the paper saying, I can't understand what you're saying, or could you develop?
That will not help anyone. But the point is,
But if they're going to get a D if they don't respond to the comments, and they can get an A, then it becomes unstable and in their control. So it seems to me that
it's unstable, but it's not in their control. You haven't told them how to do it yet. You have to tell them. The emphasis here is on telling them what they have to do, on giving them strength.
I said that this point isn't clear, so that means that
Yes,
they
the
describe-
book I did mention, the question's fine. The book I mentioned, Assessment for Learning, says the last thing you want to do is say this is unclear. That doesn't communicate what they have to change. Why is it unclear? How could it be made clearer? And if I had time, I'd actually quote examples from the book. Okay? Okay. We're all on the right. No.
I agree with you.
Yeah, I understand, but it's important that we
The comments have to be comments that
they have to be
lead
specific.
to that development.
They have to be specific. Yeah, no, but it's important to formulate it. Yes. Okay. Okay, I'm getting to the end, but let me just mention some of the things done. So this goes directly to what you're doing. You're trying to teach someone how to throw darts. This was done on some high school girls. So Zimmerman had this really bright idea. I really like this study. He divided people into 4 groups. This happened over 2 or 3 years. To one group, he said, I want you to achieve the highest score. I want you to imagine achieving the highest score. Now, that's positive. And you're saying what you want. I want you to achieve the highest score. That's the lowest performing group, by the way. The next group, he says, I want you to concentrate on a strategy. I look at it, I throw, and I follow through. So you're giving them 3 steps and telling them that's the way I want you to do it. A third method is do whatever you want, but on the next throw, say, why'd I get that one wrong, and correct it. The fourth method, he didn't call it stratify, but I do. He says, I want you to concentrate on these 3 steps for a while, and when you get good at it, I want you to try and get the highest score. And the results are, this group scored the lowest, this second, this third, and this scored the highest. So this goes back to the conversation I just had with you, which is a wonderful conversation. We all know we want to improve. We all agree on it, but how do you do it? And what we're getting down here is there has to be a certain type of specificity. It's not enough to be positive in everything else. There are some other papers by Zimmerman, but this was one that I really liked. Okay, it's getting to the end, so let me just skip this. This is advice on what do you do with an athlete who made a mistake, so it's there. Talk should be positive, reaffirming, and not judgmental. Okay, in the following pages, I'm going to examine image literature, and I got this from a wonderful book on sports, and this is the point where I thought I might be at the end. So you don't have to warn me. I'm not going to show it to you, except there are like 10 or 15 papers here. I'll just mention one example, and with that, I'll close. I had something on cyberbullying, but this is enough. I had one joke, which I'll tell you. One of the papers I read is that people who use multiple images usually do better than people who use single images. Now, it turns out some of the Psalms have multiple images. The 23rd Psalm is a very beautiful psalm. God is my shepherd. Bach wrote some music to it. It's a short psalm. It has 6 verses. It has 2 images in it. One image is God is the shepherd, and it's a really nice psalm. He leads me by tranquil waters. My soul rests down. It's a very nice picture. And the other one, I'm going to finish in 1 minute. The other one is God sets before me a table and everything else. Maybe one of the reasons the psalm is so popular is because of its multiple images. So with this, I finish. I just wanted to get to you the idea that there is literature on talk. It's not enough to say positive. We have to formulate how to do it. When we get into the details, we find some surprises. And as a last exercise, you don't have to do it now, I couldn't resist saying, suppose you want to thank me for the lecture. What is the best way to do it? And you can't just say I did a good job. So that's an exercise for next year.